So poets become important. Poets become an important means of communicating truth and history and beauty. And that's where we end up finding a little more about the poet, because the poet was called the Sahir. The Sahir was someone who knew things, meaning the poet might have had the whisperings of angels in his ears. He might have heard things from Allah that other people did not know. And of course, the poet was also supposed to be a sharp social critic of his community. And many scholars have argued that when Muhammad started his prophetic career, there were two sources that he drew on for how to be a prophet for this new religion. One, poets. Two, the Hebrew prophets.
To Muslims, the life of Muhammad is a story revered, in its mysteries as much as its certainties, that are beliefs held sacred.
Whatever we can tell about the Prophet, of course, is screened through the filter of what has been preserved over the centuries and what people have wanted to preserve. And it's very difficult to pull out from all of these different sources that are very adoring and the ordinary human being that the person that he was.
We do know that Muhammad was born in or around 570 AD in the sun-blasted Arabian Peninsula, a land of savage scarcity whose Bedouin tribes were locked in a constant state of tribal war. While still an infant, Muhammad's parents gave him his first taste of life in the desert.
Muhammad was from a town in Mecca, but he was sent off to live with the Bedouin because the people, even in the town of Mecca, felt that the Bedouin were the holders of the deeper cultural Arab values. And the Bedouin view the townspeople as having lost their really authentic roots in Arab culture and the poetry and animal husbandry and all the things that they do so well.
By the time Muhammad was 6, both of his parents had died, and he was taken under the protection of his uncle, chief of his clan. Being an outsider gave him a singular perspective.
He'd been orphaned early and developed very early on a passionate sense of concern for those who are left out of society. To be orphaned in a tribal society where clan and family relationships are your keys to everything, success, status, honor, dignity, is to face what it really feels like to be marginalized. And that obviously had a very deep impression on him as a young man.
In some ways, it was detrimental, of course, to grow up without parents, but in other ways, he was so adaptable. He had many parents, he had many fathers, he had many mothers, so it made him a child of everybody.
Muhammad's clan, like Arabs all across the Arabian Peninsula, would share the stories that had been told and retold for generations.
Pre-Islamic Arabian civilization was largely an oral culture, and was tremendous respect for and admiration for people who could express themselves orally, and especially those who could recite poetry almost at the drop of a hat. Some of the most important people in a tribe were the poets. As they sang of the glory of the tribe, they told the story of the tribe.
To the Bedouin, the word had a mystical importance. Poets linked the tribe to its ancestors and celebrated values older than memory. Poetry was the sinew that bound the Bedouin together, celebrating their victories, lamenting their defeats.
Muhammad, born 570 CE, is importantly, where was he born in the video? In Mecca. So he was a member of the Quraysh tribe. So he comes not from the margins of power on the Hijaz, but from the most powerful tribe on the Hijaz. His parents die. He ends up being raised by his uncle, the head of his clan, Abu Talib. His clan was called the Banu Hashim, and it was a clan in the Quraysh tribe. What we know about Muhammad comes from a body of literature written about 100 to 200 years, collected together 100 to 200 years after Muhammad died, based on sources that we have access to. Some of the source material we still have access to, and Muslims have had access to since the time of Muhammad. If you remember, the scholarly interpretations of the Gospels are all that the Gospels were put together within 100 years of Jesus' death, crucifixion, resurrection. But Muhammad is facing a similar situation. So the seerah, or biographical or hagiographic literature, is about 100 years or so after Muhammad's death. What we know about Muhammad from the seerah literature is just what you heard, literally about his childhood. That's all we know. And then we know that by the time he was maybe in his late teens or 20s, he became involved in the caravan trade. And from all accounts, Muhammad was a fairly successful businessman in the caravan trade, moving up from probably caravan hand to caravan director, leading his own caravans, but not running his own caravan business. And so when Muhammad was, the next time we get material about Muhammad's biography in the seerah literature, Muhammad's in his 20s, and he attracts the attention of a woman in Mecca, a prominent woman in Mecca named Khadijah. Khadijah's father, Ibn Khuwaylid, was a prominent caravan merchant who died with but one child, his daughter Khadijah. So one of the disconnects in this highly patriarchal culture, and again, this is where we sort between what is Muslim tradition and what is actual history, and can't really sort these out. But a defense has been given under the critique, well, how could a woman in 7th century Arabia run her own caravan business? Well, the defense has been that her father had died, she was the custodian of the business until she could get married. And so Khadijah hires Muhammad to work her caravan route. She finds him honest, she finds him trustworthy, she finds him a good businessman, and she finds him pretty easy on the eyes. And so in time, Khadijah asks Muhammad to marry her. And he's like, well, my boss, who's in her early 30s, by most Muslim tradition, has asked me to marry her. Sure. So he marries her and co-runs the caravan business with her. So that's the story. Now, after that, we don't know very much. We know that they may have had a happy marriage, for all we know. Importantly, Muhammad, in a polygamous society where men could take more than one wife. There's always, in nomadic societies, there's often, not always, but often a gender divide where you have a smaller proportion of men to women in the population. And you end up with kind of genetic pushes towards polygamy. But this was a polygamous society. Muhammad could have had multiple wives. The entire time Muhammad was married to Khadijah, spoiler alert, she dies. He was only married to her. We have no records or any accounts of Muhammad marrying anyone else while married to his first wife, Khadijah. We know that he and Khadijah had 3 children, 2 of whom died in childhood. A daughter survived. And then Muhammad disappears in terms of his biography until he's about 40, 41 years old. At which time, still in Mecca, and seems to have a regular spiritual practice of retreating to a mountain, Mount Hira, near Mecca, to pray and go on retreat. And during one of those retreats, he hears a voice when he's in a small cave praying and fasting. And the voice seems to be coming from him, but it's also outside of him, and it's more like a vibration that's squeezing him as he hears these words, "Recite in the name of Allah who created man from a clot of blood and taught him by the pen that which he did not know." Now, that's the English version of it. If you ever are interested in the Arabic version, just by chance, you can go to Quran.com, and in this case, so you can listen on Quran.com to a variety of Quranic verses. You can read them you can see the Arabic, and you can see the different English translations. In this case, this is Surah. The Quran is divided into chapters called surahs. This is Surah 96. And if you're like, oh, I wonder how this sounds, come on.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم.
And that's...
Is that a song?
Hmm?
Is that a song?
It's poetry, and in traditional Arabic poetry, you recite it in a way that sounds melodious and musical. If you notice, that was the Sahih International translation of the Quran. Sahih International is a Saudi publishing company. The translator of that Quran was a woman. Her identity is kind of fuzzy because Sahih International never told its buyers of that Quran that its translator was a woman, because it's Saudis. Anyway, so Muhammad hears this voice, and instead of running out of the cave and telling Khadijah, I've heard the voice of God, I've encountered an angel, he runs, throws himself, by Muslim tradition, throws himself into Khadijah's arms and says, I think I'm going crazy. I heard a voice. So, Khadijah, according to Muslim tradition, goes to her cousin. Now, whether he was her biological cousin or a distant cousin or relative or some other member of the clan, goes to him. He is a Christian. And she tells him about what Muhammad heard. And by tradition, Khadijah's cousin says, listen, what Muhammad has heard, and this is after several occurrences of hearing this voice and reciting these verses, he says, can you tell me what he's heard? So Khadijah recites some of what Muhammad has said. And her cousin says, it sounds a lot like your husband is hearing a voice that's calling him and others to repent, to turn to God, to worship God alone, and to care for the poor, the needy, the orphan, the widow. That sounds like the Hebrew prophets. So let your husband keep hearing these voices, because it's a chance maybe God has sent him to the Arab people to be a prophet to them, the way that he sent David and Isaiah and others to the Jews. And however your husband starts telling people to commit evil, then your husband's hearing the voice of Satan and needs to stop.
The months to come would bring more revelations. Powerful words of a lyrical quality, more beautiful than the most exquisite Arabic poetry. Above all, Muhammad was to bear one message to his people, a simple yet radical proclamation, that there is only one God.
The central tenet of Islam is the oneness, the indivisible unity of God. Not something that is simply that one pays lip service to, but something that is absolutely the most important concept.
Divine unity is more than saying there's only one God and there aren't other deities. It's only thinking about one thing. So to be thinking about possessions, to be thinking about status, to be thinking about power are all intellectual idols.
The implications were staggering. One God meant one people. No more tribal divisions. To the poor and unprotected, the prospect was revolutionary. Many were moved by Muhammad's message as he began to speak out in the community.
It had the suppleness and symbolic depth of the great pre-Islamic poems that had been created by this people and that had given this people in Arabia such an extraordinary ear for verbal expression, where verbal expression was the commanding cultural force. Some people called him a poet, and there's a Quranic surah basically saying, Muhammad is not a poet. Poets speak through desire. This is not the voice of desire, this is the voice of God.
So Muhammad goes out and starts preaching, at first to just the people he knows. And soon, the first convert to Islam, the first Muslim, is Khadijah, Muhammad's wife. And then his young cousin, Ali. And again, whether that was a biological cousin. So Muhammad starts making his message public. He goes out and starts preaching a message that emphasizes the oneness of God. Care for the poor, the widow, the orphan in a town that was known for being this ramshackle, rough and tumble place where the dispossessed from area tribes who'd lost tribal honor are ending up. He chastises the leadership of his own tribe for turning away from Allah to worship false gods. This is a shift from this Hanafiya who said, no, these other gods are real, but there's only the God. No, he adopts this notion that Allah, the high God, is the God, the only God, just like the Christians and the Jews believe, just like the Zoroastrians believe. So, the marginalized of Mecca, members of the Banu and his own clan, start to listen to his message, start to convert to Islam. And they begin memorizing in Arab tradition, you memorize poetry. And so they began memorizing these revelations from Muhammad that would occur on occasion. So he continues his work in Mecca through the year 622 with increasing hostility from the Quraysh, who see Muhammad's message as a threat to their power. And then in 619 CE, within 1 year, his wife Khadijah dies. And whatever protection she could have offered through her family's reputation goes away. And then later that year, Abu Talib, his uncle, the head of his clan of Banu Hashim, dies. So, 622, Muhammad at night flees Mecca for a town of Yathrib. And this marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. This exodus from a place of persecution to a place of rest and comfort and welcome has remained a theme among Muslims for centuries. So 622 CE continues to preach, but 619, problems begin, and finally by the summer of 622 is the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca to Yathrib. So Muhammad at Yathrib, we'll do this very quick. There's just a couple things to highlight here. A reminder right here, this one starred point. So Muhammad is invited to Yathrib to settle tensions between the various clans that are calling Yathrib home, that nucleated settlement, that group of villages near to each other. 3 of the tribes at Yathrib, most of the tribes are Arabs that are not affiliated with Muhammad, that are not Muslims. But 3 of the tribes, smaller tribes at Yathrib, were identified either as religious Jews or cultural Jews, and there's been much debate over this. Muhammad was invited to try to serve as a mediator, not to rule Yathrib, but to serve as a mediator. When he arrived at Yathrib, he established what became the first mosque. We'll take a look at this next time. And Muhammad started marrying multiple women. Many of these were political marriages. One of them at a time where it was perfectly acceptable in Arab culture to marry young women. One of these marriages, or at least a betrothal to be married, was with a woman named, a girl named Aisha. Aisha was around 10 or 12 years old at the time of her betrothal to Muhammad. For us, in our culture, that's a huge icky. In Muhammad's culture, it wasn't. But again, remember this theme of Muhammad doing things that break the norms of his culture and then falling right back into those cultural norms. Oh, by the way, Aisha was not to be trifled with by the time she was in her teens. Her marriage to Muhammad was a paper marriage. But anyway, that's not time for today. Then, Muhammad does this radical thing in Yathrib. He drafts a constitution. And the constitution of Yathrib might have been an even more radical idea than monotheism, because Muhammad had examples of monotheism all around him. He had Christians, he had Jews, he had more Zoroastrians, he had the Hanifs and their Allah. But he did not have examples of a constitutional form of government that based your rights not on your religion, not on your tribal membership, but upon your membership in a civic body, a community. The preamble to this constitution, to this charter of Yathrib, says, "O you Muslims, O you Oz, or you non-Muslim Arabs. O you Jews. Remember this phrase. O you Muslims, O you Arabs, O you Jews. You are one people. Not from your religion, not from your ethnicity, not from your tribe, but because of you are a citizen of Yathrib. And an offense against one of you is an offense against all of you. An offense against Yathrib must be responded to by all of you. So there's still these tribal structures of honor involved, but Muhammad has shifted that from your tribe itself, ideally, to civic membership in the polity of Yathrib. So kind of neat. And it falls apart. Really quick here, Muhammad and the Muslims end up in almost a constant state of tension with Mecca and the Quraysh. They harass Meccan caravans. They end up in several battles with Mecca. And a battle in 627 almost results in Muslim defeat because several of the tribes from Yathrib switch allegiances or are alleged to have switched allegiances. And among those tribal groups were those 3 tribes of Jews. This led to the collapse of that civic polity that Muhammad established in the Charter of Yathrib. The Jewish tribes ended up being banished from Yathrib. Now, by Arab tradition, they could have been massacred, their women, children, and possessions taken by the other tribes. But what we do know is they were banished. Ultimately, Muhammad and the Muslims settle their differences with the Quraysh, and in 629, the Quraysh end up capitulating to Muhammad, surrendering to Muhammad. So after that, there's a few things that happen that become important. Muhammad dies in 632. He returns to Mecca, and where in Arab tradition he could have massacred the men or banished the Quraysh from Mecca. Instead, he walks into Mecca with his army, goes to the Kaaba, pulls out all the statues of deities and smashes them. Kind of like Moses smashing the melting down the golden calf. So Muhammad then goes back triumphant to Mecca and lives out to Medina, rather, to the city of the Prophet, Yathrib, and lives out the rest of his days. When he dies, a council of elders elects a successor to serve as caliph. This guy's name was Abu Bakr, to serve as caliph. Now, as caliph, this did not mean that Abu Bakr was the new prophet. Abu Bakr simply was the designated ruler of earthly authority for the Muslim community. Under Abu Bakr, the Muslim community starts to transform into a small, growing political, religious state, a theocratic state, with its own army and alliances that starts to spread across the Middle East. Abu Bakr was old. He was a caravan owner that knew Muhammad from way back when. He continues to govern for just a few years, just 2 years, and then he dies. Then another caliph named Umar ibn Ali Khattab becomes caliph, and he is a military hero and spreads the Muslim message and the growing Muslim theocratic empire into the Middle East. The one that we care about for now is this guy, Umar's successor, Uthman ibn Affan. 644 to 656. So this is about 12, 13 years after Muhammad died. Uthman, things start falling apart in the empire under Uthman. Rebellious governors, breakaway provinces. But most troubling for Uthman were reports that there were written copies of the Quran. A Quran that had been recited in Qurayshi Arabic and shared by the companions of Muhammad and taught to listeners directly from those companions of Muhammad. But suddenly, in far-flung parts of the empire, away from the Arabs, among the Persians, among the Ghassanids, among the North African peoples, there were stories of written versions of the Quran appearing. So, Uthman does 2 things. He orders that all the governors are responsible for sending forces throughout their communities, throughout their territories, and confiscating any written documents purporting to be the Quran and burning them. Uthman then gets together the remaining companions of Muhammad and asks them to recite the revelations Muhammad received, and then Uthman has scribes write down those revelations, which become the first Quran, the written text. Uthman is replaced by Muhammad's young cousin, Ali, 656. Ali is killed by an assassin in 661. And those are the four rightly guided caliphs. After Ali dies, the empire splits. The Islamic empire splits. And in Syria, a governor that Ali had previously fought a battle against, named Muawiyah, claims, I should rule the empire now because Syria is politically and geopolitically and economically the most important city in the Muslim lands. And others disagreed. And those who disagreed offered the caliphate to Hassan, Ali's eldest son. Hassan presumed the title of caliph and then, under threat, renounced it. His younger brother, Hussein, was then offered the title and told, okay, you're in danger if you are in Mecca, but if you come to Baghdad, you could establish your own caliphate in Baghdad and be the legitimate ruler of the Muslim people. So Hussein takes his supporters up on that offer and marches towards Baghdad. He gets as far as Karbala in modern southern Iraq, where he's surrounded by supporters of Muawiyah and killed. That splits the Muslim empire because there are people who believed that Ali and his descendants, being biologically closely related to Muhammad, should be the rightful leaders as per Arab tradition when choosing a chief. Those folks identified themselves as the party of Ali, which in Arabic was the Shi'at Ali, or the Shiites, the party of Ali. 5 pillars and we're done. The Quran, as we just saw, was collected under Uthman. It's arranged into 114 chapters called surahs that run from the longest surahs to the shortest surahs, except for the first or opening surahs, Al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha is recited by Muslims at every prayer 5 times a day. Muslims considered the arrangement of the book providential. It was laid out by Allah that the Quran in written form would take its shape under Uthman. Because, in fact, in heaven, before creation, Allah had created the Quran, the heavenly Quran, called the al-Kitab, or the mother of the book. And that the Quran Uthman put together, the revelations Muhammad received over time of his prophetic career, were all arranged providentially into the Quran. Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, is recited by Muslims as Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal ladina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Amin. Then there's also another collection of texts that Muslims venerate beside the Quran. And this is called the Sunnah. The Sunnah are collections of stories about Muhammad. Stories about what Muhammad did, what Muhammad ate, how Muhammad brushed his teeth. I often wonder, how different would Christianity be if beyond the Gospels, Christians had stories about how Jesus brushed his teeth? How Jesus interacted with a variety of people beyond the Gospel messages. But this is the Sunnah that was collected. So companions of Muhammad, were not only narrating and memorizing and sharing with each other the revelations of the Quran, they were also sharing with each other stories about what Muhammad did and how he acted. Now the Sunnah provides rules that have been interpreted by Muslim scholars over the years to govern your prayer life, to govern your family life, just like in Judaism. There are rules about what you can eat, what's kosher, when to go and observe Sabbath prayer, and so on. And this same body of laws has covered Muslim practice for centuries. It's called Sharia. We'll return to the way that Sharia has been turned into a threat against Western democracy by some folks in a few weeks. Also, beyond the Quran and Sunnah, there are the pillars of Islam, these core ideas or core qualities of Islam. The first is a combination of Arabic terms, Tawheed, Iman, and Shahada. Tawheed is the belief in, or the reality for Muslims, but the belief in the absolute oneness and uniqueness of God. There is only Allah and there is no other being or deity like Allah. Iman is the faith or belief in the Tawheed of Allah, the oneness of Allah. Now, if you're going to become a Catholic, you have to go to a Catholic church and go through the rite of Christian initiation of adults. If you want to become a Muslim, you walk into a mosque and you sincerely profess to declare that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. وَأَشْهَدُ أَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. And if you said that sincerely, congratulations, you're a Muslim. So, Tawheed, absolute oneness, Iman, faith in the oneness of God, and the Shahada, the sincere belief that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Then, so you have the Quran, the Sunnah, the essential unity and oneness of God, the belief in that, and the profession of that belief. You have Salat, the 5 daily prayers. Just notice one of these things is italicized. Morning, midday, late afternoon, early evening, and nighttime. They're supposed to be said in Arabic, recited in Arabic to the best of the believer's ability, and ideally facing Mecca when possible. So in other words, don't stand in the middle of a TSA checkpoint and go, oh, it's prayer time, and start going, Allahu Akbar. Not a good idea. Don't do it on an airplane either. It's perfectly fine. I just still see stories of Muslims doing this, of getting up and trying to pray on an airliner. You can pray in your seat. It's perfectly acceptable to pray in your seat, or do like the Shiites and wait till later in the day and combine prayers. It's perfectly fine. All right. Also, zakat, the compulsory contribution, giving of a portion of one's wealth to the poor. And then here's where it gets sticky. Those struggling in the cause of God, those engaging in jihad, struggle in the cause of God, which in the West, we think jihad, we equate it with isometric warfare. Let's call it that, instead of using the T word. But isometric warfare. But that's not necessarily the case. Jimmy Carter could be committing jihad by building houses with a fractured pelvis. That's jihad. That is struggle in the cause of God. And it can be contributions of food or money. This gets us in trouble later, but we're running short on time. We got 3 minutes left, and we only have 2 slides left, so we're going to be good. Also, fasting during the month of Ramadan, the month commemorating when Muhammad received the first revelations of the Quran in that cave on Mount Hira. It's the 9th month of the Islamic calendar. You're supposed to fast from sunrise to sunset. That often means for Muslims getting up early and having a really big meal, and then getting up, and then after sunset, having another really big meal. Maybe running to Taco Bell for your 4th meal at the end of the day, 1 a.m., something like that, just to keep up your food intake. Ramadan, unfortunately, floats around the calendar. So sometimes please be conscious of your fellow students who are Muslim, because final exam time might be Ramadan. The middle of summer might be Ramadan. It also means abstaining from sex, cigarettes, other vices, meal breaking at fast time, and then late night prayers are beneficial. And then finally, the last thing, one thing to highlight, is the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. This occurs once a year. It's obligatory to all Muslims, if you can, to at least attend this Hajj once in your life, if at all possible. And so there you are, with the 5 pillars of Islam, the history,